Hi, this is the Regular Magazine. I'm Jason, and this is going to be the start of a new series looking at China during World War II. We'll look at some of the forces, some of the battles, and some of the equipment they used. And in this episode, we're going to do an introductory overview of the conflict. Now, the invasion of China by Japan is a pivotal chapter in 20th century history, and it marked the eruption of imperial ambitions into a devastating conflict that would merge with World War II. While the full scale of the Second Sino-Japanese War, 1937-45, is often linked to the Marco Polo Bridge Incident of 37, it can trace its roots back to Japan's earlier aggression in Manchuria in 1931. Now, in this video, we're going to look at some of the origins and explorations and consequences of Japan's campaign to dominate China. By the early 20th century, Japan had modernized rapidly after the Meiji Restoration and sought to secure resources and regional dominance, especially in China, which was weakened by internal strife between the nationalist, the Kuomintang, and the Communist Party, warlordism, and foreign encroachments. The 1929 Great Depression exacerbated Japan's economic woes and fueling militarism and expansionist policies. Now, on September the 18th in 1931, Japanese officers of the Kuomintang Army staged an explosion on the South Manchuria Railway near Shenyang, which is known as Mukden, falsely blaming Chinese dissidents. This Mukden incident provided a pretext to invade Manchuria, which was a resource-rich region. So by early 1932, Japan had occupied the territory and established a puppet state, Manchukuo, and installing the last Qing emperor, Puyi, as its figurehead. Now, the League of Nations at the time condemned the occupation, but imposed no sanctions, which emboldened Japan to withdraw from the League in 1933. And this failure underscored global appeasement and set the stage for further aggression. And the escalation came in the form of the Marco Polo Bridge Incident in 1937. Now, tensions simmered up until July 7th, 1937, when a skirmish between Chinese and Japanese troops occurred near the Marco Polo Bridge outside Beijing. A missing Japanese soldier, who was later found unharmed, triggered demands for access to a nearby town, which obviously the Chinese forces refused. Now, the incident spiraled into sort of open warfare, with Japan deploying reinforcements to seize Beijing and Tianjin by the late July. Now, the conflict expanded rapidly. By August 1937, the Battle of Shanghai saw fierce resistance, but ended in a Japanese victory after 3 months, but costing over 200,000 Chinese lives. By December, Nanjing, the KMT capital, fell, ensuring a 6-week what can only be described as a horrific event called the Nanjing Massacre, which horrified the world at the time, with an estimated 200 to 300,000 civilians were murdered and widespread atrocities occurred. Now, despite inferior weaponry, China mobilized under Chiang Kai-shek's KMT and Mao Zedong's CCP forces, who formed a sort of fragile united front after the 1936 Xi'an incident. Guerrilla tactics and scorched earth policies, such as the 1938 Yellow River flood, which halted Japanese advances. And this kind of exemplified the sort of determination from the Chinese to sort of prevent Japan from taking over. Japan's invasion at the time strained a lot of relations with Western powers. The US imposed economic sanctions, including an oil embargo in 1941, which contributed to Japan's decision to attack Pearl Harbor, and it merged the Sino-Japanese War into World War II. China became a key sort of allied theatre through Western aid, was limited until about 1941, left around 15 to 20 million Chinese dead or displaced around about 80 million. It exhausted Japan's military, influencing some of the strategies in the Pacific. Now, post 1945, resumed the civil war between the KMT and the CPC, which led to the communists winning in 1949. Now, Japan's invasion of China was not merely a regional conflict, but it was a catalyst for global war. From Manchuria's occupation to the Nanjing atrocities, it revealed the catastrophic human cost of imperialism and the fragility of international order at the time. Its legacy endures in East Asia's collective memory today and the world's understanding of wartime morality. So, in this series, we're going to look at the theatre of China. So we're going to look at the Chinese forces, we're going to look at the KMT, we're going to look at the CPC forces under Mao, and we're going to look at we'll look at the Japanese forces as well, and then we'll look at some of the key battles that occurred during that conflict, because whilst it was quite an important conflict for the Pacific, it's often overlooked, mainly because it didn't involve the big players. Like, it didn't involve Britain, it didn't involve America, not until later stages of the conflict. But the China theatre was important because it occupied nearly 500,000 Japanese troops, because Japan was desperate to control China because of the rich resources China held. And conquering China and getting those resources would further Japanese expansion, and it would solve a lot of their problems, and it would help when the Americans came in and the Brits came into the conflict against Japan. It would help to continue the war against those. So with the fact that the Chinese didn't surrender and held up those troops, meant it was a lot easier for the British and the Americans to basically eliminate the Japanese army in a sort of island hopping in and through Burma and stuff like that, because those resources that were stuck in China dealing with the Chinese couldn't be deployed elsewhere. So it is quite an important theatre, and it's, like I said, it's often overlooked. Now, we're going to take a look at some of the forces, and what I'm going to do is look at I'm also going to look at what miniatures are available to use. There's plenty of stuff for the Japanese. Warlord do a lot for the Japanese, but the Chinese is isn't really covered by many miniature manufacturers. So a lot of the time you have to do a lot of kit bashing. Now, there are some miniatures knocking about, but a few companies make, but they're not. Most of those will be metal, so you won't get plastics in Chinese. You're going to have to kit bash. But a lot of the Chinese equipment used were bought from European powers. So things like tanks, armoured vehicles, stuff like that, a lot of those came from European countries. So those kits are, you can feel those from kits via Warlord, Rubicon, and all the rest of the big manufacturers, because they bought in equipment from Europe. So, and because of the Warlord period, you've got a good mixture of some weird stuff that you can field. So during the Warlord period, a lot of the Warlords bought in armoured cars. Everything from Rolls-Royce armoured cars to the Russian, I think it's the BA-10, or is it 12? I can't remember. And various other armoured cars. So you've got armoured cars you can field. There's the early German armoured cars were fielded. A lot of the tanks are light tanks. So it's the T-26, Vickers light tank and stuff like that. The Renault, the French Renault, it's F-17, I think, or something like that. They're not big, heavy-hitting tanks. available. But it does. There are a lot of stuff that would have seen action during the early part of the European conflict. So you've got those to field, and it kind of makes. I think it kind of makes it kind of an interesting for army, because you're not using equipment from, like, if you're in the British, you're only using British equipment until the later part where you get some American stuff, and vice. If you're Americans, you're only using American equipment. With the Chinese, because they bought random stuff from anywhere and everywhere, you've got this eclectic mix of stuff you can use, which makes it kind of interesting. So basically the series is we're going to look at the conflict. We're going to look at some of the major summer battles. We're going to look at the armies. We'll also look at what miniatures are available, stuff like that available, and also how to put together a force for boat action. And we'll probably maybe look at putting a force together for, say, Flames of War. So that's what the series is going to look. It's going to be over the next few months where I'm going to put out videos. And I've got quite a nice one for Battle of Shanghai, looking at the defense of the Xi'an warehouse. I recently went to China on a trip, so I was able to film a lot of that on location. So that video, we're going to have bits of me in the studio, in my hobby room, and then bits of me talking about the defense and the battle actually in Shanghai. So, and then I also went to the museum, which is for the Shenyang incident, or the railway incidents and stuff like that. So I've got a lot of stuff around there, clips and images for that. So we'll look at that as well. So that's the series over the next few months for World War II. So that's all for this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I shall see you next time.